Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. This is all around public sector pioneers and reusing IT equipment to bridge the digital divide. So hopefully you're here because whether you're in the public sector or you're in the private or voluntary sector, you're really interested in finding out more about how you might donate retired IT equipment to the National Device Bank, reduce e-waste, and deliver real social impact in tackling digital exclusion. That's what we're going to be talking through today, and you'll be hearing a mixture of insights from Rob Benson, who is the Digital Inclusion Project Manager for Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, Natasha Early, who also works for Good Things Foundation, and Natasha is our Partnerships Manager and leads on our National Device Bank partnerships with those donating devices, and myself, I'm the Director of Evidence and Engagement. And if you haven't heard of Good Things Foundation, we're the country's leading digital inclusion charity, and we want everyone to have the internet access that they need, to have somewhere local to go for help to use the internet, and to feel able and safe in an online world. And what we recognise is that for digital inclusion to happen and to be real for people, that needs a number of things. It needs for people to have skills and confidence. It needs for people to have enough data connectivity and also to have a suitable device. And all of those things are needed. And that's why our offer is about the National Digital Inclusion Network, which is completely free to join. We've got over 4,000 different members, libraries, community centres, family hubs, housing associations across the country who in some way are wanting to take action locally around digital inclusion. And it's also why we run the National Data Bank and the National Device Bank. And we couldn't do this without strategic partners and without partners in government across the public sector and really critically in communities as well. Today, though, is going to be focused really on the National Device Bank and on that devices piece of the more holistic puzzle. And so really what we're wanting to do with this is bring together two things that are so important for our country and for our planet. And that is about fixing the digital divide in the UK, because more and more of us are getting really worried and really aware of the widening gap between those who have the skills and the access, connectivity, and those who don't, and what that means for people. But we're also really conscious that electronic waste is the planet's fastest growing waste stream. And we know that a lot of the carbon footprint comes from producing new kit. So what we can do to increase reuse of kit, to make sure that those thousands and thousands of tons of UK business e-waste are not thrown away, are reused rather than, that's even better than recycling. So that's really the driver, the twin goals that we're wanting to take forward here. And it's been brilliant that public sector organisations like Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, as well as business sector organisations, get this and get that they can play a key part in this. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a brilliant announcement. Liverpool City Region Combined Authority made a first donation of 200 devices into the device bank. So we're going to take a breather now and just going to share with you a video film that was put together around what's been happening in Liverpool City Region.
We're at Man Island, headquarters of Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and we're in the process of donating our old IT kit to help our residents who are digitally excluded across the Liverpool City region. We're proud to be working in partnership with the Good Things Foundation's National Device Bank, which is a free offer for businesses and organisations to recycle their old retired kit and provide it to digitally excluded residents across the UK. Previously, our old IT kit may have been destroyed, it may have been reused for some parts, but what we're pleased to be doing here is provide our old laptops, computers, monitors to then be rehoused into centres and residents who need that support across the city region. There's around 325,000 digitally excluded residents across the city region. That might be people that can't afford to get online, that are struggling with their skills or motivation, or don't have access to equipment, laptops or digital kit. So together with the Good Things Foundation, we're also part of the National Data Bank. And what we've been doing over the last year is provide our participants on Housing First, which is our homelessness programme, and Households into Work, which supports our unemployed residents, with recycled iPhones from the Combined Authority and 6 months of data from the National Data Bank.
This would have ended up in landfill. So it now being used by other organisations, other people who can tap into the National Device Bank, it gives us that assurance really that it's not going to end up as landfill. It's a national initiative, so it gives us a real good social value to continue with this.
We're really keen to encourage voluntary sector organisations, local authorities to register both as national data banks and national device banks to enable support for their residents to draw down from the National Device Bank and access this free equipment and kit to give out to their residents.
So Rob, thank you so much. That was a brilliant film, and it was really fabulous to hear you and your colleagues speaking about what's been going on, and seeing. It's so brilliant to be able to see that kind of retired kit exiting your building and, you know, taking a next journey to then be refurbished so it could be distributed for social good. So thank you for joining. Really keen to hear more from you about why you wanted to donate your devices to the National Device Bank.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for having me today. You know, we've been on a bit of a journey over the last 18 months at the Combined Authority, with a real focus on addressing that digital divide within the city region, which is kind of driven by the ambitions of our Mayor, Steve Rotherham, to ensure that no one's left behind. And as you mentioned there, ensuring that our residents can be digitally enabled and not prevented from falling into that digital divide. What we've done is establish the Digital Inclusion Network, which is helping to bring together lots of different partners to take on this challenge together, that focus around the voluntary sector, public sector, statutory services, and national partnerships like yourselves, about how we can work together to really take on this challenge. And as part of that focus, there's been a real wide range of activity to take on some of those core issues that we know so many who are digitally excluded face, and that's access to connectivity, access to the right digital skills, and then of course kind of access to devices. And that's where the kind of role of the device bank comes in. We know there's a kind of huge demand for devices out there, both from the providers of digital inclusion services, whether that's through the voluntary sector, individuals themselves needing that support. And whilst there are and continue to be lots of different programs to provide devices in certain ways, and we know there's still a kind of focus in terms of that engagement from device and connectivity, we do know that there's a huge untapped potential out there in terms of businesses, enterprises and organizations who have got ICT estates like ourselves, who could play a role through digital inclusion by providing recycled kit. And that's why we wanted to get involved, really. We wanted to kind of lead from the front and ensure that we can collaborate internally with our team. So bringing our ICT team on board and embedding that kind of social value, as you mentioned, to really meet those needs around digital inclusion, making sure we give back to community, whilst also addressing some of those issues like net zero and preventing that e-waste. We have got a target in the city region of being kind of a net zero by 2040, which is about 10 years ahead of national government. And that's kind of really our focus around ensuring we can bring together lots of different partners and achieve so many different outcomes by donating into the National Device Bank.
That's brilliant, and it is really interesting to hear both the strength of your kind of net zero goals, your digital inclusion goals, and also that point about giving back to communities and that social value side. And I think that came through. It was really brilliant to hear your colleague Alan really talking about that in terms of that wanting to give back and, you know, contribute in terms of social good. So those are powerful motivations, but Natasha and I are really aware that it takes still a lot of investment of time, and there can be a number of different stages to go through from having said this is something we want to do to then reaching the point, as you're celebrating in the video, which is about getting that kit, getting it donated, and moving it into the National Device Bank. So Rob, talk us through some of those stages that you had to go through.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously, you know, it can seem quite daunting and overwhelming at the beginning, but I think it's a really quite simple process, and credit really needs to go to our ICT team in this, who kind of totally bought into the desire and justification for wanting to do it, and also to yourselves at the Good Things Foundation for the support that you provided along the way. You know, obviously being a public sector organisation brings with it lots of different challenges, whether that is security, you know, value for money, those kind of key drivers that we need to consider when involving, you know, taxpayer funds. And, you know, the good news is that this process for the National Device Bank is entirely free. And, you know, the security standards across the way are met to the highest degree, and have really kind of allowed us to embed this into our provision going forward. So we kind of started off understanding the process that we had at the moment and what we were kind of used to. And I think, you know, speaking to our IT colleagues, it was around kind of standard disposal, where devices would unfortunately end up being destroyed by a third party, sometimes with an associated cost to it. You know, obviously, destroying devices that, you know, whilst might be 5 or 6 years old and of no use to an organization anymore, we know could be absolutely transformative to individuals who are digitally excluded. So there was a real need to try and address what we can do to give back, as you say, to the community, and ensure that we are, you know, kind of driving that social value and social good. We were guided through the process by the Good Things Foundation team, who were really incredibly knowledgeable about some of the highly technical terminology involved and the certification required. And that includes all the kind of appropriate WEE waste regulations, those kind of security standards, and our legal requirements within that as well. They helpfully kind of shared some previous examples of contracts that we utilised, and we then got advice and assurance from our IT teams, our IT assurance colleagues, and our legal team as well. And Natasha and the team obviously were incredibly helpful along the way, clarifying lots of those different queries that our legal team had to raise around obviously kind of transfer of ownership and risk, and obviously made all those kind of necessary changes, which were fantastic. And then once we were kind of signed up, we were then introduced it to the partners over at Economy, who handle the device collection. And we went through our inventory checklist and kind of arranged our first collection. And we want to kind of make this our kind of, you know, whilst it's our first collection, we want this to be embedded in our processes going forward, so that as we move along in terms of our device estate cycle, those older devices, as they come through, are now just part of that process where they are donated back into. And that's something that we're really looking forward to doing over the coming months and years.
That is fantastic. And I think that shift into wanting to make this part of your business as usual, how you approach your IT estate refreshes, I think that's absolutely fantastic, because certainly I think that's where, for you, for the device bank, for tackling digital exclusion and reducing e-waste, you know, that's then where you get all of those gains of having worked through everything, and it then becomes, you know, this is what we do, this is how we do it. So Rob, I'm going to take a pause here, because several other things that you've been talking about also came up in research that Good Things Foundation conducted last year in collaboration with the University of Liverpool. And that itself was building on a previous piece of research that we did with support from Deloitte and also the Circular Electronics Partnership, which had started off exploring issues about barriers and enablers for business sector organisations. And so both of these pieces of work, I think, have really helped us to understand, you know, what are the challenges, but also what needs to be in place, and also really kind of, I suppose, elevated the fact that this is completely doable and that people are finding ways to do this. So I'm just going to I've got a couple of slides here to share around what we found. Through both of these pieces of work, we were able to develop something that we're calling the circular electronics for social good, because a lot of this fits really, really well into the narrative of how within the electronics industry can we have more of a circular economy, take more of a circular approach, so that we at every stage are trying to minimize the demands and the pressures that we're putting on the planet. And within that circle, we felt that where there is a real gap and where more attention is needed is absolutely about reuse. But thinking about reuse, it might be within the organisation, but importantly also thinking about how reuse could link to donation for social good in terms of recognising those wider digital inequalities that need to be addressed, and thinking about the role that organisations can play in facilitating and enabling that. And the model that we've got there, which is features in both reports, really talks through some of those different stages and some of the key things along the way that you identified there, Rob, and that also others from public sector and business sector had identified as well. But I think one of the things that really stood out for us when we did the public sector pioneers research was that actually within that model, organisations can follow different pathways. And they might follow different pathways as well for different sorts of kit. And it's really important that they find the pathway that suits them best. And so in terms of some of the key takeaways, that was really one of the key takeaways. You've got one model, but there can be lots of pathways. And I know that's something that Natasha and colleagues at Good Things, you referred to it, Rob, are really skilled in helping organisations work out what is the best pathway for them. Rob, you've already talked about the strong motivations that are really present in the public sector around both equity, environment, and that piece about giving back to communities. And also it was brilliant to hear Alan talking about the reassurance and the confidence and feeling positive about taking part in a national initiative as well. One of the things that was also really striking was that whilst in the research we looked at different sectors, so some of it was about local authorities and regional and national government bodies, but also NHS foundation trusts, universities, further education colleges. And what we found was that the differences between sectors, there were some differences, but they were far less significant than the differences between organisations. And that really reflected, I think, the first of those enablers in the red box at the bottom. That was about culture, the culture of the organisation, the extent to which it was can do, how it held and thought about risk, how it held and thought about assets, how it held and thought about the costs that were involved. And as you said, one of the things that was really important to you, as it is to others, has been about trying to find a cost neutral pathway. But some of the other messages we've heard from people have been about actually where there may have been some rebate that they would get a percentage of profits from resale using a different IT asset disposal route. Actually, the social value, the environmental benefit as well of going through something like the device bank offset for them the small rebate that they would then get back. So I think that was one of the other interesting things that came out. So just going through some of the big challenges for public sector organisations, or the big things that are different. One around assets. These are public assets. And that both kind of gives, it makes people think very importantly and carefully about how these are then used, and also can help to make that argument of these are public assets, and actually the disposal should reflect public good as well. Bureaucracy varies across organisations as how easy and difficult that is to navigate. And I've talked already about that cost piece and some of the trade-off that different organisations have to make. And thinking about costs also comes along at different stages of that model for people. Data security is, of course, absolutely vital for every organisation. And Rob, you've already talked about your confidence then in the certifications and that just real attention to data security. But I think this might be an area where Natasha might pick up as well, in terms of different organisations choosing slightly different pathways that fit with their own approach to data security. And equity, I think this is where public sector organisations in particular have a really good understanding of both equity in terms of wanting that to be a driver for why do this, but also thinking about what happens at the end of the process, and about there being equitable and good processes of distribution through community organisations. And obviously that's what we can do through the National Digital Inclusion Network. But also the quality of that kit has to be a certain standard, because otherwise we're talking about, we don't want to be in the situation where we're distributing kit that people who already face digital barriers, might have lower digital skills, then find more difficult to use. And that's also where pairing it with data, free mobile data and SIM-enabled devices, pairing it in that way with the National Data Bank is a real win. One of then the public sector pioneers research also identified a number of different enablers. So I've talked about culture, the organisation's culture as a big factor in that. But Rob, you also spoke to the point about collaboration, both collaboration internally. So especially you said the ICT guys just came on board. They really were motivated for this to happen. They wanted to be part of kind of creating social value. And so that collaboration internally, and also then the collaboration with Good Things, the collaboration with Reconomy as our expert partner as well. And champions, Rob, I'm just going to embarrass you here. I'm going to say you are a champion. You and Alan in your team, another champion. And that's something that we're really aware of, is this doesn't happen without people like yourself who are willing to step up and take it forward and drive it forward. And it's just fantastic. You've been a fantastic champion. And I think along the way, you've created other champions in the region, in the combined authority too. And actually that point about chiefs, that's the other thing we've seen, is you do need that support from the top. And Steve Rotherham has been a real support and advocate for the digital inclusion work, I know, as well. And I think the catalyst, Rob, for you, the catalyst has really been around the work that you've been leading in terms of Liverpool City Region's digital inclusion network, and bringing voluntary and business sector and public sector together, and looking and seeing how you can support those different areas around data and devices and skills. So that's felt to me to be a really powerful catalyst for you. For others, other partners we've worked with, it can be as practical but also mundane as moving offices and a big clear out of IT, and opening the cupboard and seeing, okay, what do we do with this, and is there something brilliant we can do with it? And yes, there is. And at this point, I'm going to hand over and introduce Natasha. So Natasha, you are a partnerships manager at Good Things Foundation, and you really lead on developing the relationships and the partnerships around donating into the device bank. So I'm going to hand over to you now and ask you about how those research findings, how Rob's experience resonate with the other conversations that you're having, the other partners that we're working with on the device bank.
Thank you, Emma. And yeah, I just want to echo a big thank you to Rob, and I'll come back to champions in a moment. But absolutely, this isn't possible without people like Rob championing the device bank and helping us to get the impact that we're looking for. But going back to the research, it was really interesting. I remember the first read through of the research and saying to you, Emma, oh, wow, this actually does reflect the conversations that we're having every day. And I don't know why I was surprised, but I was really pleasantly surprised, because it was almost like I felt heard. Like what we were doing was reflected in all of those conversations. So it was fantastic. And I think that for us as a team, one of the things that I would say that has been really, really powerful over the last 18 months, 2 years, that we've really been scaling and accelerating this, is that we are just exploring all the time different barriers, different enablers to achieving this. And I can't, there isn't a pathway that we haven't been introduced to and haven't been asked to consider. And you can see here on this slide, it appears to be a very straightforward, simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, and you're there. And Rob, you said earlier that whilst it takes time and whilst there were things to overcome, actually in the end, when you look at it, it's quite simple. So it really can be as simple as steps 1 through 5. But that's not to say, particularly in steps 1 and 2, that there aren't lots and lots of things to consider. And this is where I think the power of a national approach is really strong, because you are having multiple conversations with multiple organisations in different parts of the UK who are coming at this from different perspectives and different start points. So whether that be a net zero start point or an equity start point or a digital inclusion, whatever that might be. And so the bit about organisations donating devices is very much about what are you trying to achieve. And I think that's where in the research, understanding first of all that end goal. So what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve with this, and getting the right people engaged in the conversations. So that's why the champion approach is so vital, because you need somebody who is able to connect, is able to bring the ICT team on board, is able to link up strategies that might be bridging the organization. So sometimes it's people within the sustainability team, sometimes it's people within the social value team, and it doesn't really matter where it starts, as long as at some point that conversation is joined up and everybody is on board with the end goal. So the champions piece really resonated, and linked to that obviously very closely is the chiefs and the collaboration. I think that the other part around choosing a pathway that works for you, at the very beginning, I know we were definitely, it's just this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no problem. And we couldn't understand. We were like, well, why doesn't this work for you? But of course, each organization does have nuances. Each organization does have policies and procedures and standard operating processes. And we really quickly understood that actually the point is that we want to get devices into the hands of people. How we get to that point, we can flex and we can look at, well, what's important to you? What part of this process feels most sticky for you? And let's find a way to navigate through that. So in some instances, it could be that we process the data wiping. In other instances, it could be that an organization handles that themselves. It doesn't really matter, as long as we understand that needs to happen. And so, the other thing that came out of the research that I found really, really helpful was taking that checklist approach. So saying we're not precious over who owns which part of this process, but these things all do need to be considered in the process to ensure that it's robust, to ensure it's secure, and to ensure that by the time the device gets into the hands of an individual, it is safe, it is secure, and it's able to work for them in a way that they need it to. So I think that was the other pleasing thing from the research, that felt like we had a tool that we could walk people through and say, right, you can do this checklist independently, or we can work through this checklist with you. But either which way, as long as you're considering these things, you're going to get to a really positive outcome in the end. So the checklist was the second bit that I really, really liked from the research. And then the third part, Rob, you've alluded to this about embedding this as business as usual. And I think where this has been most successful with organizations is when they have almost separated the philanthropy from the process, and it's understood that this isn't necessarily about a charitable donation, although we are a charity and things are being passed on. This is about actually just a really powerful and positive way of going about your business. And if you have an asset that is coming into an organization at one point, serving a purpose, but then has the ability and capacity to serve an additional purpose, why wouldn't you do that? It just makes perfect sense. And for that to just be part of the end-to-end supply chain for the life cycle of a particular piece of tech. And so when you start thinking about it in those terms, it's really easy. And I think it's much easier actually than thinking about this as a charitable donation, because that sort of has all different questions and things to work through, whereas just seeing this as it's part of the life cycle of that product, and actually it ends up having some really positive environmental and social impact, makes it much easier. And the sooner it's embedded into business as usual, the quicker everyone can step away and it just starts working as part of a process. So I think that was the third part of the research that really shone through for me, that where this works most is where it's just business as usual.
That is fantastic, Natasha. And as you were talking there, I was thinking, yeah, of course, you're absolutely right. This is good business as usual. This is responsible business as usual. And that concept applies absolutely just as much to public sector organisations as it does to private sector organisations that are thinking about their environmental, social and governance models. I think that responsible business as usual is absolutely spot on. I'm going to share another couple of thoughts, and then I'm going to come back to you, Natasha, and then to you, Rob, about your tips and advice for others who are feeling inspired and are interested in kind of following that pioneer example. So a few reflections are, obviously in this we're talking about the value and the benefit of a national device bank, and through being able to distribute out through the National Digital Inclusion Network. And one of the things that's really important about that is that in many ways this works a bit like, when you're donating blood. I kind of think that's a really great analogy, which is that actually it's so important that the donors of blood can be anywhere in the country, and you donate into a national system on the basis that actually your blood might then help someone in Barnstaple or in Barnsley or in Bognor Regis or wherever it might be. And I think, Rob, that was something that we were really grateful to you for, really understanding that actually this will benefit residents and community organisations across the Liverpool City region, albeit through contributing to a national initiative, rather than it being only devices from Liverpool can only go directly to people in Liverpool. But the other thing about that is, I think, Natasha, one of the things that we're really conscious of is actually at that national scale, where we operate best is then in receiving larger donations of devices, because what we really don't want to do is displace or undermine the brilliant work that is happening by smaller repair cafes, local organisations doing local refurb and getting devices donated by local small businesses or by members of the public. So from that point of view, we're playing quite a particular role in a much bigger ecosystem that really needs to be strengthened. And it will take a lot of different organisations, different sizes to get to that point where we've got a really great reuse ecosystem that also supports social as well as environmental benefit. So I just think that's also helpful for people listening today to understand a bit about how we fit in and how we see our role, and how we also see the really vital, important role of others. And in fact, there are several repair cafes and organisations that are also members of the network, because they're also using things like the National Data Bank to be able to then get free mobile data, so that they can also pair that when they're giving out devices too. You mentioned as well, Natasha, the checklist. So if you're listening today and you want to find out more information about the research, you'll find all of that on Good Things Foundation website. The Public Sector Pioneers research has got a checklist within it, which is a really useful tool. And also the research that we did with business sector organisations is also on our website as well. So those were some of the things that I just thought I wanted to make sure I pulled out before closing with your top advice for others. So Natasha, I'm going to come to you first. What top advice would you give to others thinking about responsible business as usual and donating devices to the device bank?
So start with the people. So convene the right people. Who are the invested stakeholders? And like first step, just flush out all the barriers, all the perceived barriers, just get them out there and say, right, okay, why couldn't this happen? And then once you've understood that, you can start to find the ways to make it happen, because we know it can, we know it's feasible. So get the right people in the room, all the invested stakeholders, flush out the barriers, and then look for the enablers.
Brilliant. And Rob?
I very much echo what Natasha said there. I think it's very much, not being daunted by the process, not fearing that, it's going to be so overwhelming, because it isn't. This is something, if you do it with a desire for doing good and giving back, that will filter through to the end goal. And I think, we know about that donation, the impact that it can have to communities, to organizations, and to residents, to start them on the digital inclusion journey. And at that point around ensuring that we tackle some of those challenges that are in that system, because with the kind of demand for devices, we think is around 5 times what it is in terms of the supply. So that focus is really there for, it's critical that businesses and enterprise help us meet that challenge by donating in. But really just approach it with an open mind, that it is a very simple process and could be transformative to so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of final words then, as Rob said, we know that the demand is real, it's out there. And we also know that around 7 in 10 of the organisations within our network have said that not having devices is a barrier to them being able to provide more holistic support to the people who are currently facing all of those barriers to benefiting from digital. So hopefully this inspires you to take action, and also to know that actually the people who are receiving devices through the network from the device bank are people who are working in local communities, who are able to give people who face digital exclusion not only the device, but also the skills, the support to be able to use those if they need them, to pair devices with free data from the National Data Bank. So whilst this is focused very much on devices, for all of us, this is part of a much more holistic approach to really fixing the digital divide. So do come on board, get in touch, and be part of doing something that's better for the planet and really, really helps people who are really struggling at the moment. Thank you. And thank you, Rob and Natasha.